Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to in presence to council meetings. And if we could start, call this meeting to order and start with a moment of silence for prayer or reflection. Okay, thank you. If I could get the city clerk to just perhaps do a roll call of who may be on the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we should have CAO Nicolai on the line, and Commissioner Schwarzenberger, Commissioner Maines, and Commissioner Mastel, and I think that should be it for staff.
And then Councillor Friesen and Councillor Turner, I think I heard.
Yep.
And I heard one other, I thought maybe.
Is John Zhang of Ccda Redevelopment? I'm on agenda number 2, I think, the 1108.
You're with the green. You're with the greenhouse?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get to you eventually. Okay.
Okay. So moving on now to adoption of the agenda. We do have one item to add, and that's an appointment to the Ccda Board of Directors. So we shall add that as item 10.2.
Okay. Any other additions to the agenda? All right. Seeing none, we'll accept it.
Adoption of the minutes from our last meeting of June the 15th.
Any errors, omissions? Seeing none.
Moving on now to presentations. Our first presentation is item 4.1, our regular COVID-19 update from Merrick Brown, who's our Director of HSE.
Announcing participant, Julie.
And Emergency Management.
Welcome, Mr. Brown. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Members of Council, Your Worship, thank you once again for allowing me to provide another presentation and update on the city's activities as it relates to COVID-19. This presentation, I think, is going to look a little bit different from what previous presentations have looked like. What my intention is today is to really take a bit of a reflection on the past 5 months as to what the city has done. I've said this numerous times. This is very much different than other emergencies that we've dealt with, such as a flood, a fire, or a windstorm. We can typically call those sprints. This is very much a marathon. So my intention here is to actually take a look back at the past 5 months as to what we have done in the city in a very, I guess, condensed format, but also in the same breath, take a look at what we have actually accomplished and what we intend to accomplish here in the near future. So backtracking about 5 months. So March 12th is when Dr. Dina Hinshaw restricted the gathering size to 250 people. We were notified that at the same time as the public has. I think I've said this numerous times before. We took some fairly drastic steps with that. So the first step that we took was we actually closed the Canalta Centre within an hour of actually hearing that. There was a major concert expected for that next evening. We canceled that event in collaboration with the operators of the Canalta Centre on that one. The following day, we closed the Family Leisure Centre. And in the days after that, we closed all other public-related facilities. A couple of weeks after that, the federal government enacted something that's called the Quarantine Act. So the Quarantine Act is something that is in place all of the time. However, they instituted a special requirement and a special restriction associated with the Quarantine Act, which is mandatory isolation of 14 days for anybody entering Canada. That is still in place, and in fact, as of last week, that has been extended even further, expected until the end of August at this point. So now we start progressing along, and we move into the various stages of the provincial relaunch, stage 1 and stage 2. So within stage 1, we had a number of facilities that we could open, and then we moved to stage 2, which is even further facilities, specifically our recreational facilities. So as the province continues to relax restrictions and activities, we respond as well with some of these items. So with that, our focus is always on public and staff health, and it will always be on public and staff health. With that, I can safely say and happily say that we are actually opening up City Hall on July 13th. So come 1 week from today, we're opening up City Hall. Now, what you'll see from City Hall, 6 months ago to what you see next week is going to be very, very different. No different than when we came into this facility. Access is controlled. What you'll see and what the public will see when they enter City Hall is a friendly face that will greet those patrons and members of the public and ask them actually where they want to go and what type of business they want to do with the city. At that point, they will direct them to the appropriate area where they can actually do that business with the city. Various areas of City Hall will be restricted, such as the third floor. The third floor will be restricted to staff only. Half of the second floor will be restricted to staff only. There will be other items that the public will see once they enter, such as mandatory hygiene requirements. There will be physical distancing requirements put in place. And also there will be monitors in place that will actually be monitoring some of these items and responding to either good behavior or bad behavior on this. So some other things, and which has already been publicly announced, is our recreation facilities. Our Parks and Recreation team have been excellent as to how they're actually implementing some of these items. These are difficult items to open. It was very, very easy to close these items or these facilities. We can drain the water, we can shut the door. Plain and simple. Now, opening of these facilities is much more difficult. It may be as simple, or you may think it is simple, as filling a pool. It is not that simple. We have Alberta health requirements to follow, not only with COVID-19, but simple Alberta health requirements that we have to follow without COVID-19, such as water quality requirements. That takes time. So hence why we weren't allowed to open, or we couldn't open, right as soon as the province said that we could. So once again, similar to what I said with City Hall, there are other restrictions that are going to be in place. Again, you'll be met with a friendly face. Pre-registration is actually required for some activities, such as using the ice rink. When we start opening up other items associated with the Family Leisure Centre, there will be pre-registration required for swimming. So you'll book your block of time, you'll have that specified block of time, and you'll be able to either participate in leisure swimming or lane swimming at that point. Even though prior to COVID, you were allowed to drop in, you were able to, park your vehicle and walk in and decide to use the facility, or let's say the pool for that matter, that will not be allowed at this point. So drop-ins are not permitted as it relates to fitness classes and use of the pool. So pre-registration is required. There will, like I said with City Hall, sanitizing requirements, occupancy limits, and there will be barriers in place. So this opened up today, actually, so the ice rinks and the fitness facility. So in the coming weeks, we'll see more areas within the Family Leisure Centre continue to open up, and other areas such as the outdoor pools. When it comes down to some other city facilities, specifically the Canalta Centre, the Viner Centre, and Strathcona Centre, or planned events, and more so when it relates to concerts, as I refer to planned events, such as vocal concerts. And in the theatre right next door to us, vocal concerts, they are not permitted at this point. Similar to the Canalta Centre, we are looking at stage 3 on this one. We don't know when this is going to occur. Similar to stage 1 and stage 2, they provided some very, broad dates. However, those change. Those are flexible based on some of the case counts within the province and the region for that matter, and ICU rates and just general hospital rates as well that dictate when we move on to various stages. So really the driver for this is 2 items. So number 1, obviously, our Alberta health requirements when we can move into stage 3. The second driver is our own risk assessment as a city. Again, I will say it time and time again, our main goal is public health and our own staff health, is we will not open up if we don't feel it's the right time to open up. Is we will take our own stance on that one. Even though the province says, yes, you can open up, if we don't feel comfortable and we don't have the right measures in place, we will not open up. We will wait until we are absolutely sure that we can maintain our own staff safety and health and the public's safety and health. One other item that I wanted to talk about here, before I move on to some other items, is some relaunch observations. And all of this is publicly available through Alberta Health's website, specifically the Government of Alberta's website. We have seen an increase throughout the province with cases. So there's two factors associated with this: increased testing, and I think what's even more important is increased contact. And when I use that term contact, I mean gatherings, is people getting together. We are seeing an increase based on mass gatherings. So our relaunch-related outbreaks. So when we start thinking about relaunch, whether it be stage 1 or stage 2, they increase those mass gathering sizes. They relax some restrictions. And when I say they, I refer to the provincial government. That created a belief in some people's minds. That created a belief that it's over. It is not over. It is far from over. And in fact, this is a time when we need to be ever more vigilant. If you were to go onto the Alberta Health's website or the Government of Alberta's website, the majority of new outbreaks are not healthcare facilities. They are family gatherings, condominium buildings, so multifamily buildings, restaurants. These are the result of some of those mass gatherings. These are the result of, and I hate to use this term, but I will, is complacency. So we must act ever more vigilant before. A couple of other facts that I wanted to provide to you, and this is just as of today. In fact, this is just as of later this afternoon. So we now have 10 cases within Medicine Hat, and that is 10 active cases. I can't recall the last time that we have seen 10 active cases. So this is where we as members of the public, myself included, is we must practice all of these requirements that we have ever been so used to. The physical distancing, the good hygiene, monitoring of our own symptoms, self-isolating when we are feeling ill, and getting tested. Another fact that I wanted to provide to you, and again, this is data that I was able to get today, is one may assume that the majority, or the age group that we're seeing the majority of COVID-related positive cases would be a little bit in the older group. That is not the case. The majority age group that is seeing COVID positive case counts, the age 20 to 29. That is the highest case count as of today. And it's actually been like that for some time. So even though age groups of 20 to 29 may not necessarily get ill to the point where they have to enter a hospital or an intensive care unit, I want those individuals to start thinking about your parents, your grandparents, because those are the ones that will actually go to the hospital and be admitted into the intensive care unit. So I keep harping on this one, is we must respect each other. So even though you are healthy, the person that you come in contact with may not be healthy. We must all respect each other. When we start looking, and it's simple, just looking at news articles throughout North America, the majority of the outbreaks are occurring in these gatherings. That tells us these controls work. The physical distancing, staying home when you're sick, practicing good hygiene, the controls work. Use them. Last item that I wanted to speak on, now that I have this opportunity, is a little bit of the flood risk reporting. So we are continuing to monitor flood risk, and I'll direct your eyes to the top figure there, which is actually the 2020 South Saskatchewan flow rate. In the middle, between the blue lines there, that's your average flow rate. So right at the peak there is typically the third week of June. So last week, we actually saw flow rates in the range of 1,200 cubic meters per second. We haven't seen that in over 3 years. And in fact, just that peak right at the end there with the blue line, that was actually on Friday. We have seen a substantial decrease just over the past 3 days. But we're not over yet. So we typically see something that looks similar to a bell curve. As it relates to flow rates, the flow rate will go up and then it'll go down. But because of the volatility of the weather this year, so 2020, we're seeing these drastic peaks and valleys. We typically don't see that, but we are seeing that this year. Similar to the second figure at the bottom of the slide there, we see what's called typical snowpack. And this is just one example of a monitoring station. And in fact, this is Lost Creek South. So it's just west of Claresholm, Alberta. So it's one of the stations in the foothills. So 2020, you see how much snowpack we had this year, because we'll compare it to 2019 with the red line, and of course in between the two dotted lines, that's average. So we had higher risk this year. We had higher snowpack, we had higher precipitation, we had higher flow rates, but we didn't actually line up with all of them. We could have, but we didn't. Hence, some of the reasons why we took some of our preemptive measures with our flood mitigation, because it was there, the flood risk was there, but all of those elements associated with a flood, which is snowpack, precipitation, temperature, and soil moisture rates, didn't line up the way it should in order to have a flood. But I do want to reiterate the fact that it's not over yet. And the reason why I say that is even though we have very little snowpack, even though it is in the month of July where we're outside of the what we call the wet month, is the weather is incredibly volatile this year. And so we don't know what next week or the next 2 weeks could bring. So we are still monitoring the threat. So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that complacency can easily set in, and in fact it has set in some areas or in some individuals. And so we must snap out of that complacency and keep using some of our standard practices that we are all so familiar with. We haven't defeated this. The city hasn't defeated this, the province hasn't defeated this, the federal government hasn't defeated this, the world hasn't defeated this. This virus will be with us, and it will be with us for quite some time. And so we must keep practicing those measures that we have all become familiar with. And although, just last point here, although the flood risk is decreasing, my staff and myself, we continue to monitor. Even though COVID-19 is with us, even though flood risk is decreasing, there are all of these other hazards that we monitor on an annual basis. We don't drop our guard at any point throughout the year, 365 days a year, because the next one could hit us the next day, a different type of hazard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mayor Luxton. Mr. Brown, there was an outbreak at a long-term care facility recently. I was wondering if you can give us an update on that, since that's one of the places that we definitely don't want to see a COVID outbreak.
Thank you for that. So we have seen an outbreak locally in one of our long-term care facilities. In fact, we have also experienced a death, our first death in the city here. And so Alberta Health Services, who I'm in constant contact with, are actively managing this process. And so when it comes down to outbreak management, Alberta Health Services has very strict and aggressive outbreak procedures, specifically for long-term care facilities, assisted care facilities, and any other healthcare related facilities. And so they are actively managing that. And so the processes are as they test and they test and they test and they test until everybody in that facility turns up negative. And they do not stop testing until that occurs. And so they are very closely monitoring this process. So a little bit different than a standard workplace based on the vulnerability of those individuals in that facility.
Thank you. I have one more question, if I may.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that young people are one of the groups that have seen a higher incidence of infection there. As we're opening recreation centers like the FLC, we're probably going to see maybe a confirmed case there at some point. Can you just explain what the guidelines are related to sharing information with the public about potential outbreaks that might occur at city facilities?
Yeah, excellent question. And so we have specific requirements that we follow when specifically with City Hall and Family Leisure Centers. Obviously, we're required within these facilities to collect the names and phone numbers for people entering this facility, so that if there is ever an outbreak, we want to be a partner with Alberta Health Services, obviously, within this process. And so it just supports Alberta Health Services with what's called contact tracing. And so it's a step within outbreak management, so that Alberta Health Services can quickly get on top of it and stop the spread. And so we do communicate that, and we will take aggressive measures in the event that does happen. We'll take our own aggressive measures in collaboration, obviously, with Alberta Health Services.
Thank you, Councillor Dumanowski. I'll just remind council members, you have to turn your mics on and off each time.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Merrick, thank you again for your update today. You've done an honorable job these last few months. It's your job, but you've done it very well and have kept the community, and through other staff as well in communications, kept the community abreast of everything. And, you know, when I hear you recall some of the last few weeks and months, a lot of it I guess to the average person would be common sense. It's been communicated over and over and over. However, I think one of the things that you bring to our attention today is this, I think this honest regress, if you will, where we are getting complacent, where the weather's nice, we want to be outside, we see people out there, and we have seen, and I've observed events where they are potentially exceeding the numbers. I know there are outlying communities where that's happened, and it's easy to start feeling like things are normal, but clearly they aren't. And so being reminded of it is probably part and parcel of your job, but also our job to keep the community safe. You talked about reopening some of our facilities, specifically parts of FLC and City Hall. And you touched on it, and maybe I'm glad you did, but so my question is, I know even going back to Place of Worship and others where we were required to give our names and our numbers, it's done by an honor system. What is the city's approach, being that we're playing a very frontline role in helping deal with COVID and mitigate, and is there going to be a necessity for people coming into our facilities to show ID, or will we even be taking their names and numbers? And you touched on it, and I didn't quite catch it. So, and if we are, and they come without, well, I should ask the question because I'm making assumptions. So, will there be a requirement for ID to be shown so that contact tracing can occur in the event there's a positive case of COVID?
Excellent question. So within our recreational facilities, given the fact that there is a scan card and a pre-register or a pre-registration that may be required, that in itself will track the individuals coming into the facility. City Hall, we don't have that. So once you enter the doors of City Hall, you'll be, like I said, met with a friendly face, which is one of our commissioners. And from that those individuals will ask you for your name and phone number. And the requirement in order to enter our facility is to provide this information. If you do not provide that information, I want to remind the public that there are other ways to do business with the city where you don't have to enter this facility. However, we are requiring that information to be collected.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you, Worship. So, Mr. Brown, I really want to emphasize what you have said earlier about our citizens and following the controls that the province has set. Look, we're into this thing now started back in mid-March, and here we are in July. And we've done a pretty good job as citizens in keeping this horrific disease at least under control. We're not going to eliminate it. And it seems to me as we continue to open up our society, children who need recreation facilities, bicycles on the trails, all that kind of stuff. And I understand that, and we want to have that happen. However, this is a very, very horrific disease that the best we can do is control the number of cases until such time as we find a cure, or at least a vaccine. So I encourage and ask our citizens, think about that when you're out. Have fun, but keep that 2 feet, right? Keep your fingers out of your face, out of your mouth. And yeah, if we do that and we continue to keep opening, my fear is if we get a lot of cases, the province reverses their decision and we go back to terrible times again. So I encourage and ask our citizens, please follow the rules.
I'll just remind those that are on the line to mute your phones. We're getting a little bit of background noise and feedback. Councillor McIntosh.
Thanks, Your Worship. Mr. Brown, I'm picturing FLC opening next weekend in terms of the pool and kids. I spend my days with kids, and I'm wondering what protocols are going to be in place in terms of is there going to be the restriction of keeping people 6 feet apart? How do you monitor that in a pool setting? Are there going to have to be parents with certain age groups? What's the plan with that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and this is where you'll see some other unique measures, and this is actually outlined in Alberta Health's sector-specific guidelines. Is as a pool operator, is we are required to have something that is called a COVID monitor, and this individual, it can't be a lifeguard. It must be somebody that is specifically tasked to do exactly what you're saying, is actually keep people apart. It's because it is very difficult, like you had said, to keep kids that are, keep that distance. But we are required to actually have on staff at all times when people are in the pool, somebody who is identified as a COVID monitor, and we chose to actually use that same technique for City Hall as well. Obviously, it's a little bit of a more simple task when it comes to just a static facility such as City Hall. A bit more complicated when we start looking at a pool environment, but we are required to have what's called a COVID monitor, and they can't be a lifeguard.
So just as a follow-up, I've heard concerns not so much for the pool aspect, but what happens in the change room. So will there be people monitoring what kids might be doing in the change room as well to keep them apart?
So some restrictions are within the change room. Obviously, we can't have the COVID monitors in the change room, but we have blocked off various areas to maintain some of that physical distancing that's required. But I also want to go back to, I didn't say it specifically, however, I have said it many times before in some of the press conferences, and throughout the past 5 months, whenever I speak to the public, whenever I speak to the media, is we have always taken the stance is we really want to rely on the public's decisions and responsible decision making, and I definitely commend the public for this because I do see it. So that is a situation where we are relying on responsible decision making from members of our public, which would be in the change room.
I did do a walkthrough of FLC with some of the staff in the change room, even the lockers, every 2 meters, like the lockers are even closed off, so they can only access lockers that are about 2 meters apart. Councillor Hirsch?
Thanks, Your Worship. So, in that line of questioning, Merrick, you had said about responsible decision-making. So we've all met people during this COVID thing that, you know what, they're not in on the idea of social distancing, etc. So what is going to be the expectation? So you've got your COVID watcher. He's going to say split. One person's going to say, no, that's garbage, whatever. Are we to the point where we're going to evict those people out of the pool? Are we going to be making sure that people are understanding that there's going to be almost a zero tolerance, if you will? I can understand incidental. Guy falls and didn't realize that in the pool and didn't realize they were that close. I think it's important, and Councillor Turnbull did it too this evening, for people to understand, even from City Council's point of view, that we need to make sure the area is safe for people, but by the same token, making sure that people are respecting the responsible decision making, because there are people out there that are naysayers to this thing. So I think it's good for them to understand, with the expectations of them going to a pool, that there could be, with that sort of attitude, that your pool time would be limited if you're gonna have that sort of mentality. So just your comments on that?
That's an excellent question. And short answer, they'll be asked to leave the facility. And in fact, we've already done it. We have asked people to leave our facilities that are currently open, and we will continue to do it.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, if we could get a motion for reception.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, it takes a while to unmute.
Councillor Friesen, did you have a question?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you. Yeah, my question was the same as Councillor McIntosh, but maybe I'll build on a little bit. So I was interested how we were going to control children. That doesn't sound right, but little kids are little kids. Even big kids are big kids, and it's very hard to keep them reminded to keep their distance, despite their best intentions and those of their parents, to warn them ahead of time. So I was curious about that. So you gave the answer about a monitor, and that's good. I'm wondering, I guess, about security. I mean, there are naysayers, and there are some naysayers who feel quite strongly that there's been a gross overreaction to this. So wondering if we're going to have security. And my second question, so two, security, and the other one is communication. You've done an excellent job. You and the team, Colleen and her team, have done a wonderful job of communication so far, and I think it's really important that we keep that up. It's certainly not over, but what happens after a period of time, especially when it gets nice outside, is that people kind of, I don't know, they forget on purpose, I guess. It's nice, they want to get outside, they're starting not to be so worried. I mean, when you go to a grocery store, you might as well forget any of the stuff sometimes when they're crowded. And so they start to think, well, it doesn't really matter. So in terms of communication, how are we going to keep the public informed about the importance of continuing our vigilance? So two questions, security and communication.
Thank you for that. So I'll address the first question with security. So it will look different than what City Hall is, because City Hall is a facility where we do have security presence at all times when the public can enter. So that one is dealt with from that standpoint. When it comes to the Family Leisure Center or any other facility, we use our standard practices that we would use outside of any COVID-related, scenario. And we have had occasions where obviously we have members of the public that may not want to follow some of our facility requirements, COVID aside, of course. This is last year, 2 years, 3 years ago. We have very, strict processes which our staff are trained, which our Massachusetts Police Service are trained for that matter, where we can have active response to that facility very quickly. Like I said, our staff are well trained with that. So COVID aside, they have dealt with some of those events in the past. When it comes to communication, this is one thing that we can't stop doing, and we will keep continuing. And I think just the frequent updates, and both from Alberta Health Services, the province of Alberta, and my office, and just even members of council and His Worship, being able to provide those regular communique regarding some of the the status, or some of those just reminders as we all see it. Complacency, one of the best cures or tactics for complacency is really that constant communication, and also that general positive reinforcement as well when we are seeing that responsible behavior.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, Councillor Varga?
Thank you, Your Worship. My question's with the other facility that's going to be used within the Family Leisure Center, the ice rink. I'm just wondering about how that's going to work, because hockey is a contact sport. There is only limited space within in the dressing room to get dressed. We don't know. I don't know if there's going to be numbers that are only limited to go on the ice at a time. So I'm just trying to engage my hockey buddies as to what their expectations are going to be once they get back onto the ice. Because most of those guys are older, and we don't want to see any of them getting sick.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And so with the ice facility, so the ice rink that is there's obviously going to be that pre-registration required, which is limiting the number of people that are allowed on the ice at any given time. And the province of Alberta has actually set in place requirements now for sports in which you can have an actual team cohort. And so there is that permission from Alberta Health Services to do that. And then similar to what Mayor Clugston was mentioning regarding the limitation on some of the dressing room requirements and change room requirements, and limiting some access to that.
Any other questions, comments? I do have a motion for reception. Did you get the mover and the seconder? I think it was Councillor Dumanowski and Councillor... Okay. So we have a motion. If we could vote, all in favor? That was unanimous. Thank you. Thank you.
Our next presentation is from Kent Snyder, who's our GM of Planning and Development Services. And Kent's just going to give a quick verbal presentations regarding our two rezoning applications that are before you tonight.
Welcome.
Thank you. Your Worship and members of Council, first going to start with bylaw 4619, and that is for a proposed greenhouse development. The proposed amendment is from mixed use district to direct control. So I'll try to give Council a bit of a background on this particular proposal. So rezoning is intended to look at, is the site suitable for that type of use? Not necessarily all of the detailed development considerations. That happens at the next stage, which would be a development permit if Council approved this rezoning. So the location is at 1108 7th Street, west of the highway, west of the hospital, up on top of the escarpment. It's adjacent to other office uses, or an office use, recreation across the street, which is the mini golf, and commercial businesses in that area, restaurants, hotels, gas station. And it is mostly on the edge of our developed area. So beyond that, further to the west, is yet to be developed. Historical use of this site has been previously greenhouse, has not been cannabis, but has been greenhouse. There is no neighborhood planning policy, so an area structure plan or area redevelopment plan for this particular site. But the MDP does give some guidance at a high level, and that talks about that whole area up on top, the flat, of being a good place for non-residential uses going forward. So what to consider at the rezoning? Well, you consider that is the proposed use compatible, like I stated, and also not necessarily solving all of the technical considerations with the application, but can you foresee that those are able to be met or solved at the development permit stage? And if not, then perhaps it's not appropriate to approve. So the cannabis production, which is the intended use of the greenhouse in the future, is under federal jurisdiction. And so the federal government has a number of regulations that any operation with going for cannabis production has to follow and meet. We can, though, locally layer on additional considerations that are applicable to our local site, what the site context is. So some of the major, there's three major components that perhaps are the big highlights that we would want to consider at the land use time, not in terms of conditions, but can they be met at future permitting stage. First one is lighting. So greenhouses are lit, and this is in proximity to our airport. And so one of the conditions or requirements at the development permit stage would be, can this greenhouse be fully screened to mitigate the lighting issues that potentially could be could have presence for the airport or negatively affect the airport. The second is servicing. So this area is on the edge, doesn't have complete servicing in place to accommodate a significant development. We're not sure exactly the size of the proposed development because the details haven't been submitted in terms of a development permit application. We're just at the first step, and that is land use. But we have signaled to the developer that if the intention is for a significant development, most of the parcel of being a cannabis production, that the utility capacity is not there in the area, and that significant upgrades would need to happen, and those upgrades would be at the developer's expense. And then lastly, the third major significant concern, and perhaps the most nebulous of them all, or most difficult, challenging to control, is the odor concern. And so this is a real and significant concern that other communities have had success, or perhaps in a lot of areas not had success, especially because of the mix of land uses adjacent to this particular site that I had mentioned, with an office use and commercial uses, recreation. In your packet, you've seen some adjacent landowners that have these concerns around odor. Those are legitimate concerns. There is technology, though, available to ensure that there is no odor, filters and ventilation. By no means am I an expert, or the planning department an expert in odor mitigation, but we would look to best practices if council did approve this rezoning, and when the development permit came in, we'd make sure that the conditions were appropriate and we understood and knew what we needed to ask from the developer. We would, though, I think, as an early indication, support an approach that would be rather restrictive on odor, so that no odor leaves the building, no odor leaves the site, because of the adjacent uses. If the developer couldn't meet that requirement at the development permit stage, I don't believe we would support that. So this application, as all rezonings, went through the Municipal Planning Commission as well. Staff and the Municipal Planning Commission both recommended to council approval. That doesn't mean that everything is solved. And so at the development permit stage, the next level, there's a lot for the developer to work out, odor probably being the most significant. An approval of the rezoning by council does not guarantee a permit to the developer. If they do not meet those requirements to satisfy what we'd be looking for, they do not get a permit. So there's still much work to do even after this stage. And so the next step, if council was to approve rezoning, is the developer would submit a development permit application. As part of your agenda as well tonight, this particular application, proposed rezoning, has a resolution, and that is that typically direct control development permits come back to council. This one would then go to, instead of going through that route, it would go to the Municipal Planning Commission if it was a cannabis production facility. The reason for that, the rationale, is to stay consistent with our other greenhouse cannabis production facilities we've done. Previously, the Aurora site, which seemed to work quite well to nest the final approval with the Municipal Planning Commission. So I'm available for any questions, if there are any.
Councillor Hirsch?
Thanks, Kent. So I sit on MPC, so this came to me at Municipal Planning. I was very comfortable at this stage to recommend it to council because we're at the land use change. And realistically, it doesn't really state anything yet in terms of a development permit. But yet, interestingly enough, you had indicated that if we have concerns that really cannot get mitigated at this point in time to the applicant, perhaps we should, I'll call it kill it now, but you know what I mean, to decline the application on the face of it at this point in time. And I find that interesting. And the reason I do is because we're talking about a land use classification change versus the desired result, which was ultimately a cannabis production area. So I'm intrigued in terms of maybe with the applicant, how far in conversation you've had with them. And I wrote down the 3 areas: lighting. So what's been the process to that? The servicing aspect in terms of the size of the operation, because now we're, for realistic sake, we are talking about the development now. So what's the size of his operation, the lighting, and what is the odor suppression? To the extent that we certainly received letters in regards to it, and you've been aware of that. And I even quote the position that some people are saying that you know, a measurement cannot be detected by a reasonable person of normal sensitivity when they're standing next to that. I don't want to defer to Health Canada. We need to be respectful of our city and the citizens. So I'm not going to pass the buck to go, oh, you know, talk to Health Canada, it's not our issue. It is our issue. So I was waiting, quite frankly. My vote was to allow this to go to DC, but my concern now is based on your comments. Perhaps we should be looking and getting further information, and maybe you can elaborate from my understanding, because my vote does hinge on odor, lighting, and servicing.
Sure. Through the chair, a response to that. So we have communicated to the applicant these concerns. They're aware of the concerns. They did speak at the Municipal Planning Commission, and I believe they are on the line and speak at the public hearing as well. So this becomes a little bit difficult. They understand our concerns, but they're also not obligated, or their plans may change as they move through the process. So they may tell us one thing, but that is not certainty to us at this point because we don't have actual plans or an application submitted. All we have is land use. So they could suggest one thing today, but then weeks from now it could look dramatically different. But what we understand to be the application is not the entire site being a cannabis production facility, a much smaller footprint and potentially growing over time. So I believe, but this can be clarified later on in the evening, maybe a quarter of the site, perhaps even less, as a phase 1 cannabis production. And so that seems very manageable if the right controls are in place. But it's hard to suggest that we should really bear that as a decision maker at this time because that could change and we could be dealing with the entire site. The odor question is a concern. There are some tools that are being developed and have been developed that other municipalities in North America are using, and we would look into that as well. That would provide a little more science into providing measurements of odor.
Thank you. Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mayor Cluxton. GM Snyder, am I understanding that the regulations that would control odor are federal? There's no provincial guidelines for this type of nuisance? Correct.
Through the chair, that's my understanding. Federal is the base. We can layer on local context, though, in addition to that.
Yeah, that was my next question. You know, you've mentioned that you're not an expert in odor mitigation. I imagine that that's a pretty special type of person that we don't have in the city here. And if we don't have that kind of expertise on staff, I'm not sure how it would work with layering additional mitigation factors there. Who would be in charge of actually, you know, analyzing and looking at those layers?
So through the chair, the intent or what we do on a lot of for a lot of considerations that we perhaps don't have in-house specialty is that we put that back to the applicant, to who is proposing, and we say we need to see these types of studies from professional qualified folks that will put their reputation on the line in terms of verifying those findings. So that would probably be an approach we would look to, but first we would have to do some more work on our end to know what exactly to ask for, but we don't need to necessarily be the ones to have in-house expertise to say, yes, this is appropriate. We would rely on external professionals to provide that, and we would ask the applicant to fund that.
Finally, if I may, I understand this is a new industry here and there's going to be some trial and error as we sort these things out. The thing that concerns me is that this particular site is in a pretty highly populated area. You have residential right across the street, and you've got hotels in the vicinity there. So I do have concerns about this project. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Dumanowski.
Your Worship, I think some of my comments I'll save till we get to the bylaw public hearing, but my question might be around when we're working with a proposal or a proposed development of this type, and there's a lot of questions, and it sounds like MPC even grappled with around odor, lighting, and I'm thinking of security even, and its proximity to other facilities, hotels, et cetera, that have already been stated. My wonder and my question is do we, and I know we have a real open for business attitude, and we're trying to create opportunities, increase that tax base, and I applaud staff and your department for your willingness and still putting the rigor necessary for a development like this, but being open to that. My thought would be, though, do we ever have the maybe the need to help a proponent look at other areas that might be equally beneficial to them within the city but may have natural barriers or distances or mitigation built into it, i.e. Prevailing winds or proximity to more dense or less dense areas. So have we explored that? I'd hate to see a development not go ahead. At the same time, we do have a duty, and it seems to me, and I'll maybe share that now, it seems to me that there are a lot of precipitating factors here that are hard for us to give ourselves any assurance over, never mind the community. And as representatives for them, I guess we have that duty. And zoning surely does, it takes a big step toward that. But it seems to me if we are going to make overtures to just say simply this is just a zoning change and we'll worry about the development later, we have the proposal before us. Everyone can see it. We know what we're talking about. And we probably have the responsibility to give that direction right away rather than put them through some artificial process of the zoning change and some artificial sense of success toward a development that may or may not come later on. And I'd hate to see that happen too, and I think that would be unfair. So the question was, have we explored other areas that we could have a developer do something similar but not have the same maybe repercussions?
Through the chair, maybe perhaps not overtly or deliberately, but perhaps we have. I haven't worked personally with the applicant, but they were, my understanding is staff had worked with them and informed them of some significant concerns, the ones we've talked about this morning, and tried to encourage the examination of, is this the right site for this type of project? We have another process within the city where we facilitate investment and help out, and that's through the Invest Medicine Hat folks. And we did try to connect them, but the applicant was pretty resolute on this particular site.
Thank you. Councillor Varga.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to go with Councillor Hirsch, also being on municipal planning, it is a land use change to start with, right? It's a land use change, and everything that gets dealt with on this property will be at the development permit stage, which is what we talked about also. So my question to you, Mr. Snyder, is mixed use better than direct control if we're trying to get rid of this property? Like, say it doesn't work out and we have to change it back then after it happens because it might be a different situation down the way? Or is it better to have it in DC rather than MU? Or is that hard to justify at the moment?
Through the chair, it's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer. DC gives the council and the community control over that site to be a little more specific about what we want to see there. Mixed use, our current district allows a whole bunch of different types of uses. And because it is on the edge of our developed area and we're not entirely sure what's going to happen west and a little bit to the north, DC might be an appropriate sort of first step into that area.
Thank you.
So I guess through that, I guess it would be interesting whether we change that to that for future sales if this was not to work out at the development permit stage, just to put that on the backventure of council to see whether that's a good idea to do it there and let it play its role moving forward in the development permit stage of whether he can meet those obligations or not to have that there or not. So I just wanted to ask that question to see which would have a better sales verdict, whether it's MU or it's direct control. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Councillor Turnbull.
Worship. So I have a couple of questions, but I have a comment, and we'll go from there. So my concern is if we change the land use bylaw to allow this company to come forth and look for a permit, so they're going to spend a lot of money in trying to answer the questions of lighting, odor, services, and all that. And it seems to me that that's a beautiful piece of property up there, and I get why they want to build there, because they're getting a piece of property that doesn't belong to us. It's privately owned, but it has a greenhouse right on it. So their cost to operate is substantially lower. So it makes great sense from a business point of view, but does it make great sense for the future development of that property? So let's say they do open, but they don't want to expand it. So now we got to fit somebody in what's remaining of our property, the citizens' property, I should say. And how do they get businesses that are okay with being in that situation? Because we don't have guarantees that they are not going to take the full area in there, I think I'd like to see us protect that land for other uses. And look, I'm a pure conservative guy who thinks that entrepreneurs are the backbone of our society. And we've got a 1.6 million square foot cannabis greenhouse sitting out on in an area that was far away enough to answer all those questions. So it would seem to me that would be a much better location close to that for that continued, because I think also Folium was looking to be out there as well, which is another hemp product. And so it seemed to me that that's what would work well for all kinds of stuff, whether it's delivery or transportation. So I don't know. I have to tell you, I'm not going to support the land change.
Councillor Turnbull, we may want to wait for some of your comments to the public hearing.
Sorry. Anyways, so the question is, we don't know whether the question to you is, we don't know whether they'll take our land or not, right? We have no assurance.
Through the chair, you're correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, Mr. Schneider? Okay, seeing none, if we could get a motion for reception on this. Councillor Hirsch, Councillor Varga, all in favor? It was unanimous, thank you, and then you can proceed to the next one.
Okay, next one. Bylaw 4628 is just off of Industrial Avenue, and it is a rezoning from open space to another direct control. So I'll give another little bit of background here for this particular proposed amendment.
Participant exiting.
Praveen Joshi.
This is city land, and it is for a city use as well. And it is for the city's Environmental Utilities Department is the applicant on this file. And they have a adjacent storage yard that they are currently utilizing, and they are looking to have a little bit more space at this strategic location for their operations. And so they are looking for the rezoning to accommodate that. The history of the site is located in the background is this site is located in the River Flats Area Redevelopment Plan. So unlike the last one, this one does have a neighborhood level policy plan that helps guide decisions. So Though specifically, it's between the two creeks, Ross and Seven Persons. And this particular area in the area redevelopment plan is noted as it requires more special planning on the urban design side and the planning side, because it is a bit of an interesting, unique spot that more work was noted in the plan needs to be done to determine what should happen in that area. The area redevelopment plan, this proposal is not entirely consistent with that area redevelopment plan. It allows for the continuation of industrial uses in the area, but not the expansion, and this would be deemed an expansion of the existing light industrial operation. Interesting points, though, about this is the area redevelopment plan is now 9 years old. Typically, area redevelopment plan has a good shelf life of 20 or so years, so about halfway through. When it was created, though, or adopted by council 9 years ago, there was a lot of aspirations that development would be converted from industrial to other uses to support the Medelta area, future development on IXL, and that this whole area would transform into something much different that would complement the historic Clay District. Several reasons that this has not occurred so far. Economics, there hasn't been the demand, and the pro forma hasn't worked for that conversion in terms of demand for different uses in that area. And this plan was crafted prior to one of the most significant events in that area in a number of years, and that was the 2013 flood. And so that has changed what that area looks like. And so where this is leading, or what I'm suggesting from a planning perspective, is that the ARP in certain areas, this one in particular, is a bit outdated and should be reviewed in the upcoming years to make sure that it's still a relevant document in guiding decision making. So aside from the area redevelopment plan, what would council consider and look for? The site is within the floodplain, the 1 in 100 year floodplain. We have assurances from the Environmental Utilities Department that they are open to providing a berm for to enclose the storage yard so that if we do see a flood again, the material in the yard isn't washed away into the creek system. And so as well, then something else to consider back to the ARP is if you are viewing that this compliance or misalignment with the vision of the ARP is significant, that would lead one to suggest that you should not approve this. This as well went through the Municipal Planning Commission, and both staff and MPC thought that this particular proposal was warranted in that because the economics of the area haven't shifted to see redevelopment in light or in the desired fashion that the ARP is happening, a storage yard that is not intensifying industrial activity, is a light industrial activity, is temporary in nature, can be viewed as a bit of a placeholder, so that when the economics do change for the area, this site could potentially be converted to be more in alignment with what the area redevelopment plan is desiring. So that is my highlights for council on this one, and I can try to answer any questions.
Just before we move on this item, I'm just going to remind anybody who's on the line that the previous presentation on bylaw 4619, the land use change from mixed use to DC, that was only a presentation. The public hearing is still yet to come. So council voting unanimously to accept the presentation does not mean that they have voted on the public hearing. So now, anybody questions or comments on Councillor Somrush?
Thank you, Mayor Cluxton. Before I ask my question, I just make a request that maybe we deal with the vehicle for hire bylaw when we do these public hearings. I think there's a number of people that are here.
We can do that one, after.
Just out of courtesy for the people that are here for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, GM Snyder, When you say not entirely consistent with the river flats, I wish you would speak more plainly. I mean, it's not allowed here. The concern I have is not with the particular proposal here, is with the rationale there. The fact that you say that the river flats ARP is no longer current is surprising. A few months ago, I was helping a developer pursue an idea, and I was asking for an exemption with that, and I was met with significant pushback, specifically with the rules in the ARP there, and about the significant public consultation and work that went into it in this. If we're not going to follow it, I think the first step to do then is to repeal the river floods ARP, and then we can talk about this. But the rationale as presented to me is not good enough for me. Thank you.
Can I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
Just as a clarifier, the entirety of the area redevelopment plan wasn't what I was suggesting was outdated, but this particular between the two creek systems, the context doesn't seem to fit with when the plan was drafted of the day and the participation and council input. For 80% of the neighborhood, I would say it still works, minus it should be updated to recognize the flood mitigation measures that have been put in place that this plan does not recognize. But it's only for this particular small area that I would be suggesting the plan is a bit out of alignment.
Okay.
Any other, Councillor McIntosh?
Thanks, Your Worship. Kent, you mentioned building a berm to protect the materials that are going to be in this storage yard. Does it make sense to be spending all the money to build a berm for what is arguably a temporary location for the city to store materials?
Through the chair. So potentially not. That would be up to the site developer to make sure that their resources and need met their budget requirement and the lifespan of what they suggested. The berm that an individual site developer, this department would build would not be the same kind of berm that we talk about in terms of a municipal berm. It would be more of mounding of dirt, raising elevation to ensure that the 1 in 100 flood wouldn't wash away material. But it may, if there was a flood, if it wasn't constructed, and it wouldn't, I would assume, be constructed to the standard we would build them a berm to, need to be rebuilt if there was a flood event, as opposed to what we're doing. So it would be a different scale of berm, more of a site berm versus a community-sized berm.
Okay, just as a follow-up, we've seen some development down in this area with industrial businesses, and they've come in and they've done a lot of work to perhaps hide some of their equipment or their materials and things. Now, I don't know whether that was a requirement from the city or something the private business owners did, but it certainly cleaned up what could appear to be something ugly as people drive into town on Highway 41. Would there be some sort of measures like that being put in place to hide some of the materials as well?
So through the chair, as part of a development permit or any further work there, we could look to incorporate screening. The other developments that I believe you're speaking of, those were purposeful requirements in terms of approvals to ensure that there was screening in place. Between the two creeks, other than Industrial Ave, which is a definite gateway and viewpoints, there may only need to be screening in certain areas of the site. But yes, we could explore that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to ask.
Councillor Friesen?
Yeah, I just, it's through the chair to Kent. You said a little bit earlier in your presentation something to the effect that further down the road, if there was a better use for the site, it could be repurposed or something like that. Those weren't your exact words, but could you elaborate on that a little more? I'm struggling to understand why the city of Medicine Hat would put that kind of money into something only to know that it could be potentially, having to move or something else put there in the future.
Sure, through the chair. I don't want to speak on behalf of the department, so I'll give my perspective. It's difficult to foresee within the next decade, perhaps two, that the economics of that area substantially change, where we see conversion of all industrial lands to some more intense development that would be in alignment with the ARP. And thus, probably there is a temporary lifespan of a decade or two for sites like this that could be converted in the future. So I would suggest probably the economics would work, that spending some money so that you can have a yard for a number of years, but still having the option that at one point when the economics work and there is demand, being able to convert that, because it is just a storage yard rather than a structure that is being built that then would have to be repurposed at a greater cost.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Varga?
So if I might just add a few through the chair. It's a storage site. It's going to hold material. It's going to come in, it's going to go out, it's going to be concrete, it's going to be dirt. It might be asphalt that they recycle, so it's going to be material that comes in and out. So the city needs a place to put it in order to do some of their work, and this site hasn't been used for years down there. And it can be repurposed once if there is a buyer that wants to buy this. But for right now, I think it's just going to be a place where they can store some stuff. They'll probably build the berm out of the material that they bring in there, I would imagine. But it's material that they pick up within the city on some of those occasions where they have to rip out a sidewalk, or they have to rip out some asphalt, or they have to take some extra dirt there, rather than taking it up the hill to the dump where we have to pay for it. We can leave it there and maybe recycle it and use it for future use within the city. So it's a good thing, I think, for now. And if it does get sold down the road, I think we can repurpose it to have it happen that way. So that's basically why you think what it's for.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mayor Tluxton. I actually had a question about the vehicle for hire, but I wasn't sure whether GM Snyder was sticking around or whether there would be an opportunity for him to answer a question about that at that time.
Yeah, so are you sticking around for a little bit? Because if council agrees, we'll move up item 8.1. So it isn't a public hearing, it's just for third reading of bylaw.
I know, I just thought of the question.
Some question on third, are you okay with that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. Any other questions, comments on item 4.3? Get a motion for reception. Councillor Varga, Councillor Hirsch, all in favor? That was unanimous, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so moving along to the public hearings for these bylaws now. The first one is item 5.1, bylaw 4619, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 4168, City of Medicine Hat land use bylaw, and this is for the 7th Street Southwest rezoning from a mixed use to direct control. And I've received 2 written submissions on this, and they're both in your packets. They are both not in favour of the rezoning.
So I move that the bylaw number 4619 be read a second time.
Second.
So we're required to have a public hearing on this, so if anybody, either present or on the line, would like to speak for or against this bylaw, please state your name. I will ask a second time if there's anybody present or on the phone would like to speak for or against this bylaw, please state your name.
John Zhang.
That was John.
I'm with the proposed developer of the property.
Okay, John, thank you. And I'll ask a third and final time if anybody would like to speak for or against this bylaw. Please state your name.
Speaking against.
Okay. I'll let the proponent, the developer, speak, and then sorry, I didn't get your name?
John Zhang. John Zhang, last name spelled Z-A-N-G.
John, if you would like to go, please state.
Yeah, I don't have a huge, lengthy submission. I heard your comments. Essentially, this is an opportunity to turn an existing greenhouse into a project that can be profitable again and continue with the current use of the land. I have developed calendar greenhouses before in BC, and we're just completing one right now in Foremost. So we do have experience with the issue of lights and smell. no involvement with the airport in my past. So we do know about those issues. I think we can address those issues. The one I built, of course, the foremost one is pretty much rural, but the one in BC was in Merritt, BC, so it was essentially in a residential area. But I guess that's my submission on this, to move, essentially the greenhouse is there now. It's developed for a greenhouse now. The only difference is from the operation of, it used to grow flowers in that greenhouse. So the only difference now is the table flower and the smells from the flower. Other than that, it's essentially the same concept as existed in the past. Again, to move the greenhouse is costly, and that will mean essentially I won't do it. It's too costly to move the greenhouse. You may just buy a new greenhouse and develop it somewhere else. So to the owner of the site, he's stuck with the greenhouse on it. You deny this, he essentially has to tear down the greenhouse or find someone to decide to produce vegetables or flowers in the greenhouse instead. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Do any council members have any questions? Councillor Varga?
So John, your other greenhouses that you do have, were they existing greenhouses or were they built from scratch?
The one in Merritt is not actually a greenhouse, it's a warehouse structure, so it's not glass ceiling. So that one was built from scratch. The other one in Foremost, we bought that greenhouse from someone else in Bull Island, actually, and moved that greenhouse to Foremost. And the reason I say I'm not going to do that again, the cost to do that ended up being essentially far more costly than if I just went out and bought a brand new greenhouse.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh?
Thanks, Your Worship. John, you used the phrase essentially in a residential area for your development in Merritt.
Right.
Could you compare essentially in a residential area to what we're dealing with here, which is across the street from a commercial building, right very close to a hotel? If the wind switches from the east, we're dealing with our campground, and we have a number of residences within a stone's throw. So could you compare this site with your site in Merritt, please?
They're way different. They're way different. Essentially, Merritt was surrounded by what I call hobby farms, essentially, like, I don't know the acreage, probably 5 or 10 acreages around the site. And those were essentially residents, I call them hobby farms. You guys kind of know what hobby farms are. So that's essentially what it was around the Merritt greenhouse, the Merritt cannabis facility. So that's way different than what you're looking at here, of course, because here you're looking at the most close in proximity businesses are industrial or retail. I think the trailer park is, the residential trailer park is, I think, 400 meters or so away from the greenhouse.
I would agree with that, perhaps that distance, but that's not a large distance in terms of if you're having issues with odor control. Would that be a correct comment?
Yeah, for sure. If there's issues with odor control, actually, I'm a pretty straight shooter on this. If there are issues with odor control, even a kilometer away, you're still going to get that smell. Maybe we're small, the greenhouse, so 50,000 square feet isn't large, but if we, say we open the vents in the roof, so we're emitting the full-on odor, that will travel a full kilometer or more, for sure. I can't deny that, for sure. If there's no odor containment put in place, the odor will regress, for sure.
Thank you. Councillor Hirsch.
So John, that just leads me to my questions. I sat on NPC and voted to bring this forward to City Council to listen to it tonight. You know, I'm trying hard to understand what levels that you're going to do to mitigate the lighting, the servicing, and the odor. So I'll do it one by one. So the lighting, they talked about shading, so I'd like to get your comments on that. The servicing piece, it sounds like you're going to be using potentially only about a quarter of the available landmass there at this point in time, which the city acknowledges if you were to expand, it would cost some servicing dollars for you to get your needs met if you were to expand. And then the third piece is the odor. So are you prepared if I was to give you my vote in regards to moving forward with the development permit and having everything on the table like we just talked about tonight, are you able to support the idea of having these three items pretty heavily regulated in terms of even the odor, to the extent that, because you just acknowledged that within a kilometer you could get a smell if you don't have any mitigation strategies. So what's your game plan to reduce or eliminate the odor emanating from your development with a hotel nearby and other industries and businesses?
Yeah, there's technology out there that removes any scent of the cannabis smell from the air emitted from the greenhouse. And it's far easier to do that in a smaller greenhouse than a larger facility, because it's just moving less air. So that's my answer to that. The regulations from Health Canada are pretty stringent in that regard. So my response to that is there's technology out there to move with the odor, right? Full stop. And I'm prepared to abide by that for sure. So I got no concerns over meeting that requirement, because that's a requirement from Health Canada too. That's a requirement that everybody has to meet or should meet. I do know some larger producers are less, I guess, probably less required by Health Canada for some reason, but I'm pretty sure the smaller guys face the overexposure from Health Canada much sooner. So I'm just saying the order is for sure some requirement we have to meet, full stop.
So just to follow up. So with that, John, if you get my support, it would be coming with some very tight regulations, lighting, which would be shading in terms of the airport vicinity, and the odor. You say there's technology out there, and you're not at the development permit stage, and I get it. We just heard testimony tonight saying, you know, you could say, you know what, this is what I would like to do, and 2 weeks later, change it on the development permit. So I'll grant you that you have options in front of you. I guess when we get to all I'm saying right now at the land use change is that you go into this development eyes wide open to the idea that there would be quite heavy restrictions on the odor, on the lighting, to the point where it would be almost nil. And I guess I'm just making sure you understand before you come with the development permit and spend any additional dollars, because I respect that as an entrepreneur, that those would be probably, certainly, I don't speak for everyone, but that would be my expectation for sure. Do you understand?
Yeah, I do. And on the odor, I'm not concerned with any restrictions on odor at all, because I know I can meet them. On the shading, I had a brief discussions with planning. They didn't really raise the airport issue as much as you seem to be raising it, so I'm not aware what that issue is for the airport, for the lights, but I consider that for sure. But essentially, the lights are only on for in a normal day, 12, like not on for 12 hours days because it's a sky greenhouse, right? So in the worst, in the winter time, you're looking at lights being on for 4 hours, right? So you can add the 4 hours to the start of the day, the end of the day, or half and half. But if you're telling me I got to shade my whole greenhouse to turn on the lights, then what you're saying is I essentially may as well be in a warehouse. Being a warehouse, my companies are environmentally aware. We're trying to not to create environmental nightmare, a carbon footprint of warehouse-style cannabis growth facilities. Essentially, if you're saying no light can emit from the greenhouse, we may as well be in a warehouse and just use that huge amount of electric power rather than be using the sunlight.
Okay, well, maybe I'll get Mr. Schneider to explain that, the shading a little better, but due to the proximity at night, it can harm the pilots. The pilots have a difficult seeing to land, so the shading either has to be permanent or remove on and off so that you can get the natural sunlight. But
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, you pretty much nailed it there, Mr. Mayor. So along the approach paths that we have coming into the airport, although this one is slightly to the side, it's not directly within an approach path, but it definitely is adjacent to it. We are getting all greenhouses to have full blackout curtains that are mechanically opened and closed. So in the daylight, you're able to open them and get your sunlight. At night, they're closed so that pilots are not affected by the visibility. And this is a requirement that we've also worked with Cypress County. So it's a partnership that we're both implementing that requirement.
I just wanted to make sure the developer was aware of that. Councillor Turnbull?
So John, first thing, I do owe you an apology, sir, because I hadn't had a chance to hear you speak at the public hearings before I said that I couldn't support it. I think your idea is an excellent one. I think your comments that you've made are weighing very heavily on me now. And so please take my apology, sir, for jumping in when I shouldn't have.
No worries, no worries.
So being successful in doing this in other places is a great plus for you, and I get it. The greenhouse is there. That person will never be able to sell that building and land without somebody being able to utilize it. So good for you for finding it. So I'm going to think very deep and seriously. I think Councillor Hirsch said it right. My biggest concern is if you choose not to move any further, the city-owned property beyond you then becomes much more difficult to develop for us for a tax base. But nonetheless, I appreciate you looking at our city. I know that you're talking about 25 jobs, which is great. You'll be using our electricity and our gas, so that's good as well. So anyways, thank you so much, John.
Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments for...
Your Worship?
Yep.
Yes, I have a question.
Councillor Turner?
The greenhouse that you moved to Foremost, do you have that up and operating now?
No, it's still being completed right now.
So my concern on the odor is I think it's probably much easier to control odor in a building rather than in a greenhouse. Particularly that greenhouse is fairly old, and I'm not sure how airtight that is. So I guess if we were to move ahead with this proposal and you put your odor mitigation in place and it doesn't work, then where are we at?
Well, I don't know you guys' regulations. I'm pretty sure I see in my approval no odor can emit. then I can be shut down. Health Canada will probably shut me down before you guys do. So I'm well aware of that concern. That's, to me, doing these projects in the past, the first concern was always criminal activity. I think people are moving away from that, but now they're looking at order, right? I fully understand that. So again, if I emit odor, I'm shut down, full stop.
Well, the reason I bring this up is I was reading some articles, and I think this odor has been a fairly big issue in Eastern Canada, where a number of regular produce greenhouses have been converted to cannabis. And some of the residents, when they could not get satisfaction from the municipality, they went to Health Canada, and basically Health Canada told them it's not our problem. Go back to your municipality, and the resident kind of gets in the middle there. And trust me, I would love to see more development. I would love to see that property developed. It's been sitting empty for a long time. I like to see entrepreneurs come into our city, but my concern is if all of a sudden, a year from now or 8 months from now, you get up and running and we have issues, and we're the ones that are going to take the brunt of this from the residents, the hotel owners, and the restaurants that are down the way, and that is a big concern of mine. So I got to give this a lot of thought on my vote. I do appreciate you coming and talking to us. You have answered a few questions for me, but the odor issue is kind of sticking in the back of my mind. Even the new Aurora site at Ledoux had some issues with odor, and they're supposed to be the latest technology. So that is a definite concern of mine.
I totally understand the concern about odor. I think almost any industrial activity emits odor, right? So anybody who's industrial has, any industrial business has an environmental concern, right? So if you're recycling asphalt, you're emitting odor too. A cancerous odor, right? So you should look at that in your previous city application if that's their concern about odors. Because you get worse odor from recycling concrete or asphalt health-wise than cannabis. Cannabis, people don't like the smell, understand that, but it's not a health risk. But the law is we can't emit odor from greenhouses. That's the law. So I'm prepared to abide by that law.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I do, Your Worship, if I could, through to Mr. Zahn.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate hearing your perspective on this because I've been thinking long and hard about it myself. My question actually is not about odor. It's about the lighting, because you said you were less familiar with the requirements around lighting, and I just want to make sure I understand. Given what you've heard from Mr. Snyder, are you, and you said you didn't understand them as well, are you now feeling comfortable with the requirements that will be imposed around lighting for airport purposes? Because the last thing I'd like you to do is spend all this money and then not be able to meet a requirement like that at the end.
Yeah, I'll have to look at the cost to install the shading. Every cannabis greenhouse has some shading anyways, because essentially in Canada, you get too much light at some point, right? In summertime right now, there's too much light. So we do need some shading to shade the sunlight. So it's, I don't know what time it is right now, but it's too light right now for the cannabis plant. So you have to have some shading anyways. So I'm just concerned about the shading you install to avoid tonight sunlight isn't a 100% block because it's in sheets, right? So you have gaps, small gaps, but there are gaps. If you look inside the greenhouse, you see some slivers of light coming through. So if the opposite indicates that sliver of light can't be emitted, yeah, that's an impossible requirement to meet. That's
So,
what I'm saying.
yeah, just to follow up with you then, if you were to find out it was cost prohibitive, and this is hypothetical,
Right.
would that change your mind about proceeding? Because I just hate to see you spend all this money and find out at the end that, oh, you weren't quite aware of that requirement and now it's going to cost you too much money to proceed.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Like if the full blackout is required, and the cost to do that is immense, like this is a business, right? The business has to make sense. If it's going to cost me $1 million to put in blackout sheeting, yeah, I probably won't proceed with I won't buy it. I won't buy the greenhouse.
Okay, I mean, I'm asking for a reason because once a zoning change is made, it opens the door for other similar type, other things that fit within that zoning. So I'd rather that be clarified first. Your Worship, can I ask a question then of GM Snyder or maybe the city clerk?
Yeah, the GM.
I just can't remember whether this was, I can't remember at the beginning, sorry, if this was for, how many readings are we looking at here?
We're on second reading right now in the public hearing portion.
So we can go to all 3 readings tonight.
Yes.
And what would happen if we tabled it for 2 weeks while Mr. Zahn found out about the cost of lighting?
I suppose we could pass second reading and then hold off on third.
That would be my preference. I think it's only fair, and it seems that lots of us are thinking about this, but wish him very good success. So I think it's only fair that we give him that opportunity.
City clerk, would we have to have another public hearing on third reading if we tabled it?
We can adjourn the public hearing and continue it another time if that was council's wish.
Okay.
We do have another
Yes,
person waiting to talk to.
I am trying to get there. Any other questions or comments of John, the developer? Yep, go ahead.
John, can I ask you the question? Does the smell come from the producing the marijuana plant, or does it come in the processing of the plant, or does it come from both?
It comes from both, but we're not processors. We don't intend to process the plants. We essentially we get a license to process from Health Canada, but that's not our intent. We plan to just grow the plants and package the plants to ship them to our processors. That's the answer, I guess, is both. But for this greenhouse, the smell will come only from the growing plants.
Okay, and when you said that when you're growing it, are you going to open up the windows on the top of the greenhouse?
No.
Oh, you're not?
No,
You're going to keep it enclosed the whole time?
Essentially, we have to install our own air handling equipment, and that equipment includes air conditioning, of course, and also includes odor removal equipment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of the developer? Go ahead. Yep.
So John, what is the percentage versus growth smell from growing it versus smell from processing? Is it 50-50 or is it much more on processing?
I can't help you with that. I'm sorry. My guess would be it's more odor from processing because you're essentially grinding the stuff up, right? Whereas when it's growing, it's just stagnant. But that's just like I say, don't write that down in pen because I can't assure you that's right.
Well, if we adjourn the public hearing till the next council meeting, I think it would be interesting to know those facts so that we actually have a real grasp on how much odor percentage would come from just simply growing. And it might be the question that sways the whole project.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and find that out.
Any other questions from of the developer? Okay, seeing none. So was it Ivan? Yes. Yeah. Come on up and you have the floor. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. I'd be happy, before I start, I'd be happy to come back to another council meeting if we do want to do that.
Well, I'd prefer to get this public hearing and get everything up on the table right now and hear on your side.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening in regards to our concerns and questions about this bylaw. I'm Ivan Long. I'm the Vice President of AutoStar CompuSystems. We own the property directly adjacent to the land in question. I'd like to note AutoStar is a proud Medicine Hat-based technology company that's been a part of this community for 37 years. We create computer software for retailers throughout Canada, the United States, and the Caribbean, and we employ 30 outstanding computer science professionals right here in Medicine Hat. I'd like to thank also the City Clerk and staff for addressing many of our initial concerns, such as light and noise pollution. Based on their answers, we have no further worries with regard to many of those issues. I realize, for airport operators, you might still have some. For the record, we are not opposed to new commerce opportunities for the City of Medicine Hat. We're business people ourselves, and it's our wish to be good and reasonable neighbors to businesses that wish to set up nearby our own property. That being said, we do have very significant concerns about the strong odor associated with cannabis production and cultivation. Cannabis greenhouses all across Canada have created a large number of complaints about odor. This is not a theoretical problem at this point. Extensive experience has shown that this is something that will create hardships for neighboring residents and businesses. During Mr. Snyder's presentation, he noted that one of the items that we look at this phase is if we believe the technical problems can be solved and if they are solvable. And I would say, based on what we've seen across Canada, there's abundant evidence that this is a technical problem that in fact cannot be solved, practically speaking. These facilities, including those that have promised no odor and usage of state-of-the-art high-tech odor filtration systems, have in fact created significant harm for their neighbors and the surrounding areas. In the letter we wrote to council, we cited many examples from national newspapers and documented cases of this in other regions across the country. Rather than citing those articles one by one, I'd like to simply leave you with two quotes from them. First, from Federal Minister Bill Blair, he said, I quote, "I fully accept that it can affect the quality of people's lives and the enjoyment of their properties." And the Federation of, end quote, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, in one of their articles we provided, states that this problem is, quote, "notoriously difficult to regulate and remediate," end quote. And I'd like to stress especially the remediation. Our concern is that once this facility is built, it will then be too late, essentially, to do anything. And we've even heard from Mr. Snyder that the problem is, I believe his word was nebulous when it comes to odor with this kind of a situation. In some of the cases in other parts of Canada, neighbors 5 kilometers away from cannabis production have repeated complaints about the odor. Our property sits less than 10 meters from this greenhouse. So given that it's 5 kilometers in some cases, people are complaining about the odor, we think being literally right next door would not be an appropriate use, and we have significant concerns for our 30 staff members who need to work next door to this property 40 hours a week. That is, if we ever get back after COVID. While we're not opposed to this development and bylaw in principle, we did have some questions that we would ask City Council to consider. First and foremost, what specific steps would the city require in the planning stage to mitigate odor? Will there be a standard that must be adhered to, particularly with the levels of volatile organic compounds, VOCs? That's what actually creates the smell associated with cannabis. And we noted that the equipment to measure this objectively is extremely expensive, difficult. We've heard it's something that we don't have a lot of expertise in, and in fact, I would expect most municipalities don't have expertise in that area. So we would prefer something if the standard is quantifiable. If it's not quantifiable, what we would ask the city is to look at other jurisdictions, and the one we had cited was Sacramento, California. In Sacramento, the laws there state, quote, "such that the odor cannot be detected by a reasonable person of normal sensitivity outside the buildings," end quote. We're not asking for bloodhound level of sensitivity. We're asking for a normal, reasonable person like you or I, that we don't have to work next to this all day, every day. if there's not the ability to enforce these regulations. And the enforcement is the last point I'd like to make. We are concerned about what the complaint and dispute process would be. We've heard numerous times, and it was suggested to us from city staff that Health Canada is the go-to dispute resolution on this. And to be fair, that is what the legislation says. However, as Alderman or Councillor Turner, I believe, pointed it out, Health Canada has previously said in other communities that have had this problem that they are not interested in policing that problem, which would leave us and neighboring businesses and residents in a very difficult position that now we have to try and convince a federal bureaucracy to enforce something that they've previously said they're not interested in enforcing. So what do we do at that point? We're in a rough spot. It leaves us in a catch-22 position. I would note that some facilities have faced hundreds of complaints in other jurisdictions, and that's all the way from BC to Ontario, the examples I gave. So our ask of City Council today is essentially that the city either reject this bylaw and the subsequent development altogether, or at a minimum, and this could be at a later stage, we would be amenable to that, put in place clear standards prior to the approval that would be specific and enforceable, and it would prevent those kind of issues for ourselves, our neighbors, and the other residents of Medicine Hat. From our standpoint, we are hoping for and would be happy with a reasonable compromise that could be reached, and hopefully something that could be a win for ourselves and the city of Medicine Hat and all the surrounding businesses. So thank you very much for your time. I'm certainly, if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer any.
First, I'm just going to let John just maybe have a chance at a rebuttal, and not saying you said anything that wasn't true. Yep. John, would you like to, if you're still there?
Essentially, I heard everything you said about other complaints from other greenhouses. Many of those greenhouses, after there were complaints, rectified the problems, right? So the problems can be solved. So it's not a situation where there's a problem identified by some citizen and then there's no resolutions to the problem. There are resolutions to the problem. Not every time, I'm sure that I can point to some cases, not all cases are solved, but they can be solved, that's the key. And his idea of a requirement of no smelling emitting from the greenhouse, like I said, that's what I think the requirement is. So to me, I don't care if that requirement is later. So Health Canada can have that requirement. The city can also have that requirement. So if Health Canada decides not to enforce that requirement, for sure, the city can still enforce that requirement. So I'm not opposed to his idea, just allow the developer to go ahead, but with a stringent guideline on the allowance for smell from the facility.
Thank you. Any other questions of council of any of the presenters? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sensing that I'll close the public hearing. Public hearing is now closed. So we have a motion for second reading and a seconder. We could table this for 2 weeks, if council so wishes.
Yeah, you can table it for 2 weeks, and you can also just adjourn the public hearing and then reconvene the public hearing if you so wish next time. Or you can table it, or you can have a stab at passing it or not.
Maybe we should adjourn the public hearing. I said close, but maybe we should say we adjourn the public hearing in case we want to reopen it again. Yeah. And if I'm sensing nodding, people tabling it.
Councillor Hirsch as well.
Okay, I've got, sorry, was that you had a question, or was that you trying to tell me somebody else? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Somers.
I just want to clarify on what basis is it for the tabling. Are we looking for a specific amount of information?
Well, I don't want to taint this, but I think we're looking for a little bit more information on the smells associated with mitigation measures, and perhaps even an alternative whereby there is some sort of dispute resolution that can be worked out between the city and the neighbors. Councillor Hirsch?
So, you know, and I've been on MPC 2 times now, and my understanding was when you get to the development permit, or sorry, you get to the land use change, kind of speak to the land use change. In this case, yes, we know that there's an intended use for it. I guess I'm just questioning as well, why would we adjourn this? My feeling would be if everyone's okay with the idea of it going to DC, which still is not a limiting factor, quite frankly, it just goes to council. The applicant heard very clearly the thoughts and opinions of council members, to which I would think he's a very smart man and would go back to administration, to Mr. Snyder specifically, and said, okay, what was it that you require? Very specifically, to the point when or if that development permit comes forward, we have that natural ability to have that discussion at that point in time.
So I think that GM Snyder, though, did say that it would go back to MPC, not to council, even though this is DC. So I've got a question. Does council have the right to pass increased regulations over and above those of Health Canada before construction starts that could, protect the neighbors? Or would we be out of bounds?
I believe we could layer on additional, not require less. So we have to meet them as a minimum, but we can go beyond with site specific. Can I also suggest that the resolution that is attached to this is a separate item? So if council wanted this development permit to come back to council, you wouldn't have to pass that resolution. That resolution is just an option for council.
That's at the end, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we could change it to direct control and then have it still come back to council.
Correct.
Okay.
With the full understanding from the applicant to obviously get some clarification on the expectations going forward from the city to both parties' satisfaction. And then it'll be up to the applicant at that point in time to determine if it's feasible for him to move forward, both financially and respecting the neighbors, and if it makes sense. And from that, I want to see a dispute resolution process. Health Canada is not going to come to Little Medicine Hat and save our day. I want to see it clearly laid out so that the neighbors are feeling some understanding of that there's coverage here and that there's the backing of City Council or the will of the city in terms of that. But it has to be okay with the applicant as well, obviously. And if both parties are amenable, then we'll probably see a development permit.
Yeah, Councillor Domanowski.
If I could.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not willing to do that tonight, Councillor Hirsch, because I heard the developer say that there was a little bit more information he needed, and I am unwilling to make a zoning change that could impact a bunch of things down the road until we know that. That's why I want it tabled. I realize there's requirements and we want to work together, and I don't disagree with your point, but I don't think we're there. Once you make a zoning change, that's permanent. And I'm not willing to do that until our developer has a chance to find out the additional information he seeks. So that's why I support a tabling, and I don't think 2 weeks is going to be the end of the world.
Can I rebut?
Go ahead.
So with all due respect, Councillor Friesen, there was discussion from our GM indicating that neighborhood is really under transition, that it would be probably not a bad idea to actually have it DC, that we can control the fact that even for the purposes of this discussion tonight, if it's not a cannabis facility, it might be something else that has light emitting. We're still near the airport blanket that needs some consideration as well. So for me, I'm relatively comfortable changing that, knowing that that area is in transition.
Councillor Domanowski.
Well, Your Worship, I appreciate all the comments and the petitions on both the proponent and the business community who are not necessarily opposed, but have presented, I guess, opposition or some comments for our consideration. It's hard for me tonight because many times over the years, it's exactly what Councillor Hirsch is saying is we're dealing with a zoning change and that's it. And we're actually not only requested, but almost told to forego any development aspects because it could do what I think has happened tonight and is challenge our belief or our support for a zoning change because we have a hint or we have a lot of information or somewhere in between about what could be going there. And doing a zoning change is supposed to be unfettered in that regard, but we either made the mistake or we did the right thing. And we have everything here before us today. We have the public hearings. We're hearing exactly what's going there. We're talking about the challenges. There's data that's supporting for and against the arguments of granting a zoning change for a said development down the path. It's pretty hard for us to ignore that. And I think it kind of makes a mockery of everything we've done in the last 45 minutes, quite frankly, if we don't take that into consideration. So I have my comments, but I'm not sure if I'm waiting for another day to say them or if I'm saying them today. So I guess I'll be guided by yourself as the chair.
I'm going to, and sorry for Councillor Friesen and Councillor Turner, I will remember to ask you to vote. I'm going to call the question on second reading. Oh, we got Councillor Turnbull, sorry.
We're running over. First of all, Ivan from AutoStar, I think it's absolutely wonderful of you to come forth and say that you would support this project as long as we have these controls in place. And so, John, understand, if we put these controls in place and we have a mechanism to control it, and you can't, understand it's your money. And we will not put at risk other businesses in the area if you can't comply to those conditions. So I think you're both obviously reasonable people. You both made some great presentations here, but the only way I would support it is actually based on Ivan's suggestion. I think that's the fact that he would support business in our town, but he doesn't want to jeopardize his own. So Ivan, thank you so much.
Councillor Samraj?
I'm confused. I can only imagine what the public feels right now. I've been operating under the assumption that the land use change was in preparation for a cannabis production facility, although I realize that that's not necessarily the case. I can divorce those two things and support the designation change. The other question is, I'm just as I'm reluctant to let another level of government police the issue of odor, I'm reluctant to let MPC police the rest of this process here. So if we are agreed that we're going to reject the resolution at the end of the meeting, that this will come back, then okay.
Okay. I mean, we can't vote on something that hasn't come up yet, but I'm looking around friendly. Okay, Councillor, who do I have? Councillor Dumanowski?
So, Your Worship, are we doing what Councillor Samar said? We're divorcing ourselves of what's coming forward from good
We're
term.
saying this is a resolution that we'd have to pass, and if we turn it down, it has to come back to council because it's a DC.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to speak to why I'm not going to support the zoning change, which is predicated on information we heard tonight. I don't want to, and I'm not in the position of, and I said earlier, of choosing or electing to choose which businesses have more merit or less merit in our community, and I think we can all share, and we have all, I know in our term, agreed that creation of jobs is important, but there has to be some rationale to the decisions we're making, not at any expense or to any extent. And I think one of the things that I'll work backward from was, I heard someone say, you know, I think it was Jim Snyder said we can go beyond, but we can't go less than what, when it comes to what Health Canada or otherwise would overlay on a facility like this. But when you look at the links that Ivan brought forward and just our own reading of papers and literature over time, we I think what would be difficult, and anytime you're adding to something like Health Canada, think about that. You're adding and overlaying over what Health Canada requires. Where's the municipal or court jurisdiction tests? We could find ourselves, and I'm not saying that that's where it would go, but that's essentially what we're saying is if we create more overlay or requirements, higher rigor expectations than what they would even do, and we heard what they'll do when people come to them and complain, then I think we're setting ourselves up for failure, quite frankly. What I would like to have seen, and it goes back to what I said earlier, and I mean this genuinely, is that perhaps there was an opportunity for the developer to do the same kind of business in an area more congruent with for this kind of development, and again with spacing and prevailing winds working in their favor, et cetera, et cetera. I had the same concerns when we passed and made supports for the development in the north, and in a modern facility that was, and I had asked, was going to make have expectations of little to no emitting odor. And here we have an older facility. I'm not saying it can't be retrofitted or that the proponent wouldn't put the steps in place to deal with that, but we hear and we're seeing time and time again where a similar facility of this nature, a smaller player, if you will, maybe retrofitting, they will have difficulties. And so I can't put the donkey blinders on and ignore that. We have a campground. I forgot about that one in close proximity. We have businesses, we have hotels. And honestly, even more so, we would be putting a developer in a bad position because I got to believe he feels he can and would. He sounds like an honorable person to put everything in play to mitigate. But we've seen, and there's evidence that supports that, against this, and there's a lighting issue, there's all kinds of things. And again, I'm going to say it, as I said earlier, there's the security piece, which I know would be a consideration as well. Zoning is one thing, and yeah, if we zoned it to direct control and had to come back to council, been there and done that many times, it gives us lots of control, but it seems senseless or futile to some extent to move to something like that, because it can also sterilize a developer or an owner of land from doing what they want to do in the future, because there's direct control is considered the highest level of control. So in some ways, it actually goes against not only the development, but it goes against what the current owner trying to sell this is trying to achieve. So I think we have to be very careful tonight. And for all those reasons, not the least of which the integrity of the developer who's trying to do something honest here, but also we have people in the vicinity who are trying to earn and continue to earn in an honorable way. I think the responsible thing would be to deny it. So I will not be supporting.
Thank you. Councillor Somraj?
Yeah, I apologize, Mayor Cluxton. I'm with Councillor Dumanowski on this point. I don't want to give the developer false hope here. For me, the issue of odor is so subjective. I foresee endless problems in trying to mitigate it, and everybody's going to have a different opinion about whether it has been mitigated or not. So I'm going to be voting no today.
Okay.
Your Worship?
Yep, Councillor Turner?
Yep. Yes, thank you. So I'm on the side with Councillor Dumanowski and Councillor Samaraj. I think my biggest issue, it's all well and good for us to sit here and say, yes, we're going to put these rules in place and that this has to be mitigated, but what if it isn't? If we have legal there, what can we do legally? I look back a number of years about, we had a business that was closed down, and it wasn't because of odor pollution, it was because of noise pollution. And look how that dragged the city through many things, and that business eventually went out of business, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. And I would just as soon we settle this tonight, and so this particular developer doesn't waste any more time if it is denied, and doesn't waste any more money. And I just think this odor is going to be an issue, and I don't know that there is technology out there to mitigate it. particularly in an older facility. So I just can't support this as well.
Okay. Any other comments on second reading? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of the zoning change? Raise your hand. That's 3. Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner? I heard.
I'm no.
Councillor Friesen? Councillor Friesen?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mute button. I am not opposed, but I'm opposed to going forward with it tonight until there is more information. I know none of you are concerned about the lighting, but it's a major concern, and I don't want to change the zoning until we know.
I'm sorry, Councillor.
I can't support it.
Okay, you're a no. So all opposed, I think that's 1, 2, and then the 2 on the phone. Okay, so it dies, defeated at second reading. Thank you.
Okay, so that bylaw was defeated on second reading. Our next public hearing is bylaw 4628, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 4168, the City of Medicine Hat land use bylaw.
John Zhang.
I move that bylaw number 4628 be read a second time.
Second.
We're required to have a public hearing on this. Anybody would like to come and speak for or against this bylaw, whether you be here or on the phone, please state your name. I'll ask a second time if anybody would like to speak for or against this bylaw, whether you're here or on the phone, please state your name. And a third and final time, if anybody would like to speak for or against this bylaw, please state your name. Hearing and seeing no one, we will close the public hearing. Any other comments on second reading? Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mayor Tluxton. I won't be supporting this zoning change. I think the specifics might make sense for me. The rationale doesn't, and so on principle, I'm going to say no. I think if there are issues with the River Flats ARP that are out of date or current, we should do that and not just kind of break it up piecemeal like this. So I'll be voting no.
Thank you. Councillor Dumanowski?
Largely echoing Councillor Samraj, we have an ARP that's currently in place. I understand the arguments that have been made by Jim Snyder in regard to its historical nature and what has occurred since then and its proximity to flood fringe, et cetera. I think it would be hypocritical, quite frankly, for us to conveniently allow our own zoning change because it suits our needs at the expense of it being currently incongruent with the ARP. That's one of the arguments. The other one is, and I was thinking about the plan calling for redevelopment and reinvigoration, if you will, of that area. And I recognize that what has been put forward is it would be temporary, a decade, 2 or whatever, and then it could be removed. The problem is things start to take on ahead of their own if you start to show it as such. And if you sterilize this land with fencing and concrete and asphalt debris, et cetera, and in a more extensive or expansive way, it's going to look and feel that way, and it's going to be even more difficult for people to vision it differently. And again, I just think for a lot of those reasons, not the least of which, again, currently it's incongruent with the ARP, and we need to honor that. And if we're gonna stand, arms crossed when it comes to other arguments with the River Flats ARP, which I support, and use that as a backdrop to defend or deny, and we're not here when it comes to our own application, it would be highly hypocritical. So I'm not in support.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you, Worship. So I guess I'd really like to hear through the chair from Commissioner Maines as to what kind of storage items we're talking about. If we're not talking about environmental damaging products, then I think the whole question changes dramatically. Right now, we're using it as a storage area, part of it. We own the property. If environmental utilities needs products, that's pipes, that's all kinds of different stuff that we need to keep our city distribution systems, environmental utilities working properly. I think we have to understand, first of all, are we actually going to destroy that property from ever being used without environmental problems? So
Commissioner Maines, do you feel that you can answer that, if you're there?
Through the chair, yeah, I can give some context to Councillor Turnbull. Councillor Turnbull, Environmental Utilities actually currently operates a similar site right adjacent to this lot where we store and conduct recycling activities for asphalt, concrete, and this opportunity was for an adjoining lot that appeared to have very little interest from the public in terms of alternative usages. There was an opportunity for us to expand our recycling operations on a brownfield site, shall we say. So the intent here, those uses are done within the enclosed building that's adjacent on the south side, would be that this would be a storage area for asphalt, concrete, and dirt that would be used primarily by Parks and Recreation for various uses across the city. That soil would be non-contaminated soil, so there would be no concerns from that perspective. But certainly, hopefully that's some context on the site. I'm also available for other questions if others have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yep. Go ahead.
And Commissioner Maines, I appreciate that commentary because, in my mind, we talk about the ARP and the river flats, but don't forget that's an overlay over residential, commercial, industrial. We're talking here about a piece of land that is well off an arterial road, so you don't need to put any screening up. There is a related use already an adjoining piece of land that we're already utilizing. It's simply a case of picking up the material that's on that land. I don't believe that there's a building even being constructed on this land. It's just pure storage. So we own it. We want to use it. Otherwise, it's already been indicated it's sterile land. It's been on the market for years. There's no smell emanating from it from a previous application we just talked about. If you had an appraisal done on this by a professional, they would probably indicate that this approach would be one of the best uses for the land. So for us to say, you know what, I don't think so. I don't think we're giving our own selves any justice in the fact that we own the land. We want to use it temporarily. We can get it back to the use of the land and the look of the land by using trucks and stuff to get that material off the property. So I am fully supporting this. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, we're on second reading. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner?
I'm a yes.
Okay. That was Councillor Turner was a yes. Councillor
I'm a no, thank you.
What did she say? Sorry, Councillor Friesen, can you yes or no?
Yeah, I said no, no.
Okay.
Not in favor.
Okay, and all opposed? Okay, it passes. We go for third reading.
So I move that the bylaw be read a third time and passed.
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments on third reading? Okay, I'll call the question again. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner?
I'm a yes.
And I'm a no.
Okay, all opposed? And that passes. Third reading. Thank you. So with council's indulgence, if we could move up third reading of the vehicle for hire bylaw, just because I see there's some people in the audience that probably don't want to sit through the rest of a council meeting. If we're okay with that? Okay. I don't see anybody, any dissenting, so that would be item 8.1, bylaws for second and third readings. Then this is for third reading. If I could get Councillor Dumanowski.
Sorry, Your Worship. I move that bylaw 4617 be read a first time.
Third.
Third time, pardon me.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any questions or comments on third reading? Councillor Samraj?
Mayor Cluxon, I realize it's not normal procedure to ask questions at this time of staff. Is it possible to ask GM Snyder a question?
Absolutely. Yeah.
GM Snyder, you did a lot of work in preparation for this bylaw in regulating ride-sharing companies that potentially could come to the city here. I think the rationale for that was that it's important to kind of get our ducks in a row before this actually happens, since it is a fairly disruptive change for a community. Has any community successfully kept out ride-sharing? Like, can you block them? Is that even a realistic option?
Through the chair to Councillor Samaraj. I'm not sure, I don't acknowledge if someone was purposely working to block them. No municipality is forced to accommodate, so we could not put the appropriate rules in that would allow them. So it's a choice. We can accommodate a company, a business model like that or not. It is up locally to us to determine.
Okay. Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you, Worship. So I've received emails from taxi services here in our city, and I fully understand the situation that you're concerned about your livelihood and your business. But what I have to say is that our whole world is changing. Technology is changing at tremendous speed, and what we did yesterday will not happen tomorrow. And so rideshare, Uber, and all these other companies have become hugely successful. Now, these folks don't get any more special privileges when they apply for a license from the city. They have to go through the same process as you. Now, I guess you can say, oh, it's easy, Councillor Turnbull, for you to say that. It's not your livelihood. It's not your family. No, I get that. I understand that. But I can also tell you how many emails I get for people saying, when are you going to allow Uber in town or some other rideshare company? Because that is sort of the way of the future. So I wish I could say that I'm not going to vote for this, but I just truly believe that the world is changing and we will have to change and adapt to that situation. So that's where I stand.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to support this as well. For me, I guess it's a question of whether or not you're going to be able to regulate a ride-sharing company when they come here. And for me, it's better to regulate than to not regulate there. I certainly understand that cab drivers have a difficult job and it's tough to make a living out there. Unfortunately, this is kind of the way that the world is going, and maybe it doesn't come, but I think we do need to consider to have some rules in place if that day comes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add, so I guess what I would say, what has Amazon done to brick and mortar stores? We have retailers going out in bankruptcy by the hundreds, in fact, by the thousands. Why? Because that's the nature of the world. Everybody likes young kids. My girls and my sons, they shop online like crazy. Because it's easy for them. They don't have to get out. They can do it at home. It gets delivered. So I was a retailer for a lot of years, and I find that really a tough pill to swallow. Because number one, those companies don't put any money into our city. They don't pay taxes. They don't employ people locally. But that's just the way our world is going, and so we all have to just adapt. So please understand, I wish I could help you. But I do have to support this bylaw.
Any other comments? Those on the phone?
Yeah, if I could,
Go ahead.
I've certainly had emails as well, and I've had some mixed feelings about this. I've been very concerned about safety requirements for new companies coming in, but I have been assured and feel comfortable with the answer that has all been taken into account, and it is very safe. So I, like Councillor Turnbull, have a great deal of empathy for those taxi companies, drivers, families that are concerned about their future. I think there's a place for both. Sometimes competition is much more healthy than you realize. I think we have to do this. I'm going to support it. But I just want to say that I recognize your angst. I hear you. I understand it. I think you might be pleasantly surprised in the end as a result.
Any other comments? All right, we're on third reading. I'll call the question. All in favor? And those on the phone?
Yes.
Yes.
That was unanimous. That passes. Thank you. So we're back to reports.
Our first report's item 6.1, Administrative Committee meeting June 17th for information.
So moved.
Councillor Turnbull, did you...
Yes, I know we're really deep into the night, but I do think it's important when we talk about money we're spending and where we're spending it. And so I've asked through our CAO to have Commissioner Maines talk about our closing down of our gas wells in Free Flight in Saskatchewan. And both these RFPs are about that. So, Brad, maybe you could give us just we're running out of time here, short, so that our citizens and the rest of the council understands exactly where this money is going. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Turnbull, through the chair. And I'll be brief in recognition of the time. But we, earlier this year, Council gave its consent to what we call the Accelerated Abandonment Strategy. This was an effort to mitigate ongoing operational losses in a very in a commodity that has been in crisis, and we expect will continue to be in crisis for a long time to come. Expedient exit at the end of the day appeared to be our best option, and we are executing on that approval. Tonight's recommendation, tender proposals RFP in front of us tonight is reflective of that. And for those that were able to read it in depth, will notice that it's actually for reclamation. And reclamation is the second part of our exit. First part is where we remove the surface equipment and we do the below ground securing of the well to ensure that no future fluids or gases are capable of reaching the surface. And then we enter into a reclamation phase that takes between 3 and 5 years on average, depending on which part of the various provinces that you're in. So the fact that tonight's RFP is reflective of almost 800 wells in our Free Fight field indicates that we've already done that first phase of abandonment, and we'll now move into the reclamation portion of that. We expect that the majority of the remaining subsurface work should be concluded by the end of August in Saskatchewan, and we do expect to then move into our two non-legacy fields, being Atlee Buffalo and Ironmore in Alberta. We will commence abandonment and also have those fields into reclamation by the end of 2020. All work being done with all COVID-19 procedures in place for the safety of our contractors and for our staff. And we're proceeding efficiently and expediently on this program. We are and did see significant amounts of interest from reclamation companies for this RFP. We have chosen two parties that we think are best able to execute on a program of this magnitude, and this is from a relative perspective, a very large reclamation program, all occurring in one time and one place. But we have confidence in our service providers that they will be able to execute on the reclamation, as I said, which is a long-running program. The amounts we see here tonight are for the full cycle reclamation, so this will not come back next year for more money for that. This is the amount that we expect will cover the reclamation for those 800 plus wells. Great job by GM Red and his department in NGPR on executing on a vision. And as we indicated to council, we hope that through this accelerated program, we'll be able to show for the residents and for our taxpayers significantly less operating losses than we would have occurred under the status quo. Thank you.
Just a comment so everybody understands. This is repairing the roads or putting them back in the grass where these wells were. But we're still on the hook until we get the right from government and the landowner. We're still having to pay our lease payments. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Council Turnbull, that is correct. Rural taxes, municipal taxes, and surface rentals continue through to reclamation certificate being issued. As I said, in that period of 3 to 5 years, and it is fully our intent to continue those payments.
So this is the cheapest part of reclamation. We're just, the more expensive part is coming, correct?
Actually, if I could just, to the chair, correct Councillor Turnbull, the more expensive part was, in aggregate, would be, no, sorry, back up on that. It's been a long night. You're right, the reclamation portion generally, on a shallow gas well in Alberta or Saskatchewan, an average would be around $55,000 to $65,000. The actual downhole abandonment portion of that is around $15,000 to $30,000 in some cases. These are averages. Problematic wells will bump those numbers up, but the remaining $30,000 to $40,000 is that reclamation portion. But that also, as the councillors indicated, also includes our taxes and surface rentals.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, if we can call the question, all in favor? And Councillor Friesen and Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor
I'm yes.
Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you.
Item 6.2 is Energy and Utilities Committee meeting, just for information.
So moved.
Call the question, all in favor? Councillor Turner, Councillor Friesen?
Yes.
I'm in favor.
Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you.
Item 6.3 is the Public Services Committee meeting during the 22nd for adoption of the one-time Community Vibrancy Grant.
I will move the item for adoption.
I will second that.
Any comments? Okay, seeing none, if we...
This has had fairly wide media coverage. In very brief terms, this is about the remaining money left in all three advisory boards grant funding for the rest of this year till 2021, and that is because COVID has changed our world substantially. A lot of the money that would have, a lot of projects that would fit the original criteria for the grant is no longer applicable. There is no major events, nothing like that, and lots of money was devoted to those kinds of things. So this is an opportunity for a much larger picture criteria for the community to apply for what remains in all of them, and do something a little different. And if you look at the criteria here, it's very broad, very wide, very community-based, and will, I think, result in some very, very interesting projects. It's a one-time thing, and we'll see how it goes at the end. It's kind of exciting, actually.
Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead.
Councillor Friesen, can I ask the question? Some of the money has been used. What events took place in the special cultural events and the special events competition? I see there's money that's taken out of there. Did those events happen in the
I
first 3
think,
months?
I can't answer you specifically, Councillor Varga, and maybe I should turn it over to Commissioner Mastel. I do know that some of the money went out. There has been some returned in some areas, and maybe we should hear about that, and the other would have been spent. So maybe I better turn it over to Commissioner Mastel.
Commissioner?
Through
Go
the
ahead.
chair, I don't have the details of what was spent, but Councillor Friesen is correct that any of those funds that had not been expended were returned. So this is the remaining funds. I can follow up with details on what amounts were spent in those budget allocated areas.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, if we can vote, all in favor? Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner.
I'm in
Yes,
favor.
I'm in favor.
That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 6.4 is the Corporate Services Committee meeting of June 23rd with the Family Leisure Centre Co-Generation Project for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? Okay, yep, go ahead.
Ironically, I wasn't at my own committee meeting. However, I do thank Councillor Hirsch and Varga for being there. I found the cogeneration project to be of a lot of interest, and you know, when we're talking about opportunities and within our operations to be more efficient or effective and environmentally friendly, et cetera, and at the same time take advantage of funds that come our way, which seem to be rarer and rarer or more difficult at times to pursue, especially in uncertain times. I think this is a great project, and the payback will be short term and then in real dollars, and then well into the future from a savings standpoint. So I just applaud staff for looking for these opportunities. I know sometimes they come to us, but sometimes we have to look for them. And if I understood this one, if I recall my reading, is one that we sought out and thought we could optimize on. And I just applaud staff for looking for these things. And this is a situation where a little bit of money in the front end will save us a lot more money in the long term. And that's really the kind of the climate we're in right now. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Varga?
Just a thought. I think it's worth noting that unless we get the MCCAC grant of $612,590, we won't be doing this, I don't think, on our own. So I hope that we do get that grant money from the government in order to do this. So people say, oh, we're spending a bunch of money again, but it all depends on this grant money that we receive. So hopefully we do get it, because I think it is a great project and it will help our leisure center immensely in the future and save us some dollars. So I hope we do get it.
Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner.
In favor.
In favor.
That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 6.5 is the Administrative Committee meeting of June the 24th with the tender for information.
So moved.
I will make that. Oh, okay, I'll second it.
Any comments on this one? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner.
In favor.
In favor.
That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 6.6 is the Audit Committee meeting, June 25th, and this is just for information.
So moved.
Second.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Turner.
In favor.
In favor.
That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 6.7 is the Administrative Committee meeting of July the 2nd with two items for adoption on this. The naming of Cooley Ridge Drive and the renaming for Goodyear Way requests, and the sales and pricing strategy for 3 ready-to-market properties.
Before we deal with this, item 2, the sales and pricing, can we can we vote on 2 of them and table 1, even though it's all part of just one?
Yeah, motion, yeah.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, if we could vote on separating out, obviously, keeping the First Street and, what's the other one? Gilwell versus pulling out Elizabeth Street School. What's that? Scout Hall, yeah. Okay. So I got a first, seconder, and I'll just call the question now if we can separate these. And Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner?
It's
I'm
just
in favor.
voting separately, right?
In favor?
Yeah, so what we're going to do on this report is table the Elizabeth Street School for 2 weeks, and then vote on all the rest.
Not tabling the complete item?
No.
Are you saying?
Just the Elizabeth Street, that's what
Well,
was my
then
question.
you'll need an amending motion to remove that portion of the recommendation.
That's what we just voted on.
Oh, okay.
I said keep the 2 in and keep the 1 out.
Right.
Okay, is that how everybody understood what they were voting on?
I was under the impression you were just asking to separate item number 2
Yeah,
and
no,
deal with that
I
separately.
was trying to separate within separating.
I
I think
you-
council understood what they were voting on? Yes, okay. And we're okay with tabling Elizabeth Street School for 2 weeks. So the rest of the report can stand. Any questions or comments on the rest of the report? Councillor McIntosh?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a quick comment on the naming committee. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend, but I did submit my support for both of these names being added. Cooley Ridge Drive obviously makes sense to have the main road through Cooley Ridge identified appropriately. And the second one, Goodyear Way, in recognition of Goodyear's involvement in our community for 60 years. And both of these were quite easy to support.
Any other questions or comments on this report? All right, I will call the question, and we are voting on everything other than Elizabeth Street School sales and pricing strategy. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Councillor Turner?
I'm in favor.
In favor?
That was unanimous, thank you.
Reports for reception, item 7.1, Police Commission meeting of May 21st.
I'll move the report for reception.
Second.
Comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Turner?
In favor.
In favor?
That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 7.2, the Municipal Planning Commission meeting minutes of May 27th.
I move this report for reception.
Second.
Comments? Hearing, seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Councillor Friesen, Turner?
In favor.
In favor?
That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 7.3 is the Heritage Resource Committee meeting of June the 9th.
So moved.
Second.
Comments?
If I could just make a quick
Go ahead.
comment,
Yep.
Your Worship. So I just wanted to highlight the work of one of the members of the committee, Sally Sane, who is the individual that did a huge amount of work putting together the First Street walking tour booklet on a number of homes in a certain section of First Street. And the second booklet has recently been released, and people who are looking for a great activity on an afternoon, you can pick up the walking booklet at the Esplanade or at the visitor tourism booth, and it's just a great way to learn a little bit about our community, and commend Sally on just a huge amount of work that she put into this.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Jamie, are both those books available still? The first one and the second one?
Yeah, here.
Okay, thanks.
I don't see any other questions or comments. I will call the vote. All in favor? And Councillor Friesen, Turner?
In favor.
In favor?
That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 7.4 is the Police Commission meeting of June the 18th.
I'll move this report for reception as well.
Second.
Comments? Seeing and hearing none, we will, okay, if we could vote, all in favor? And Councillors Friesen and Turner?
In favor.
In favor?
That was unanimous, thank you.
Okay, moving on to bylaws for second and third readings. We've already disposed of the vehicles for hire, so I shall move on to 8.2, bylaw 4624. Bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to incur indebtedness in the amount of $7,082,000 for the purpose of the 2020 WTP Residuals Management Facility.
Move that bylaw number 4624 be read a second time.
Second.
Comments? Seeing and hearing none, if we could vote on second reading, all in favor? Councillor Samraj? Okay. Councillor Friesen and Turner?
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor.
Okay, that was unanimous. Go for third reading.
Move that bylaw 4624 be read a third time and passed.
Second.
Comments? Seeing none, if we could vote on third reading, all in favor? And Councillors Friesen and Turner?
In favor.
In favor.
That passes, that was unanimous.
Moving on now to new business. We've already disposed of, we should dispose of item 10.1 by withdrawing that from the agenda because the bylaw was defeated.
Do you have to vote on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're voting, so if we get somebody to move that we remove this from the agenda as it is no longer necessary? Okay. If we could vote, all in favor? And Councillors Friesen and Turner?
In favor.
In favor.
That is removed.
And our last item of business is an appointment to the CCDA Board of Directors. Councillor Samraj will speak to this.
I move that City Council appoint Caleb Motz to the City Centre Development Agency effective immediately with a term to expire December 31st, 2022.
I'll second that.
Any questions, comments? Seeing none, if we could vote, all in favor? And Councillor Hirsch? And Turner and Friesen?
In favor.
In favor.
And that was unanimous, thank you. Seeing no more business before this council, we're adjourned.
Participants